doubt in no one's mind.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Coffee and Open Source, a place where we can talk about open source things and have lots and lots of fun. I got my coffee. I hope everybody else is ready. Today my guest is Noelle Silver. Say hi, Noelle.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
No problem. So Noelle, do you want to just talk a little bit about yourself, just high-level intro?
Absolutely. For those who may not know who I am, and it's kind of, you can easily go find me on LinkedIn, Noelle Silver. There's a long rendition of my career, but in short, I've been in enterprise technology my whole career. I started off at IBM, and then kind of pertinent to this conversation, I was stolen away to go work at Red Hat and talk about the same exact technology I was building at IBM, but open source and using, maintenance and licensing and all of these different models that I really began to appreciate. They actually called it like the light and the dark side. And I think Red Hat was the light and IBM was dark, but now they're families. I don't know how you explain all that. But after that, I went to Vmware and really helped during the virtualization when that became a really popular thing, right before AWS and Azure and cloud providers became kind of the norm. And then after VMware, I went to Amazon to work at AWS in education and training. And then Alexa was born. And that kind of catapulted my career into artificial intelligence and machine learning. I went to Microsoft to help with Microsoft Cognitive Services, which are applied AI models I went to NPR for a little bit to run the engineering organization as their VP of engineering. And now I'm working for a company known as HackerU, which builds university education. It's one of the reasons I really wanted to talk, to you and have a conversation about this, because I think open source is a really big part of an educational journey. And HackerU is kind of where my focus is at now. How do I democratize education and make it easier for people who maybe can't go a traditional route to learn more, to learn faster? And it's definitely the way I went. So every big software project I've ever built by myself, GitHub was a huge part of that learning curve. So I'm a big proponent of vehicles for open source, but also just the philosophy of an open source development practice.
Yeah, like your comment that you just made about how important GitHub is, right? GitHub is so important, as at least how I see it from like a software development perspective, that if I talk to somebody and they don't have a GitHub, I immediately go, okay. I don't try to judge people if they don't have GitHub. I understand if you don't, because GitHub, it, to an extent, is kind of like a coder's social media. Right. So I definitely understand why you might not want to be on there, but I immediately go, and I just hired, 12 engineers for HackerU. And it wasn't a gate, but it was certainly the first like little flag that I'd be like, do you have a GitHub account? Even if you don't, like, I'm not a believer that you have to be building original code all the time on GitHub. But if you've, gone into repos and taken a look around, found something you liked, forked it, made some small customizations, anything that just showed, it gives you the ability to demonstrate, your interest in community development and crowdsourcing ideas and getting help from people who may know more than you, and also even new ideas from people who know less than you. So I've really found it to be, a good indicator of how closely you might be tied to that kind of philosophy of development. But as you said, I don't use it as like a gate or like a red flag, but it is an interesting sign that I can use that someone might be in alignment with the type of development philosophies that I have. It's definitely a slippery slope, right? Like there's a large contingent of people that talk on Twitter about this all the time. Like, should we use like GitHub profiles instead of resumes, right? Or like, would you hire somebody if they didn't, if their GitHub activity chart didn't have a bunch of green on it, right? Yeah. Like the ultimate status symbol is like, I have no life, or I don't care about anything else other than the things I'm working on. Which, if that's your decision, have at it.
Right.
I wanted to
there's some of us that write code on Friday night, we're like ready to go work on our, natural language processing, project that we built, or a climate change, data science, an ingestion project, or whatever it is. And we do it for fun. But I'm a very, very, I use it as a variable. Like it's one piece of data that is useful to understand how someone works and what they're passionate about. But I would say less than half of the people I ended up hiring actually had an active GitHub account. Yeah. But it was a tell for me to be like, all right, this is interesting. And as a result, some of the people that did have a GitHub account were a little bit better at articulating, because when you build, people are going to see it. Yeah. So they're a little bit better at documenting. They're a little bit better at certain practices that you get good at when you're using GitHub regularly. But those characteristics are by no means the only thing that I look for. So I think it'd be a disservice to your own organization to miss people who don't have a GitHub account. But I do like it when it sits as like, I always encourage people, if you have one, to just put it as a featured item in your LinkedIn profile, so that it shows up. It's not like the main thing, but it's at least a piece. And unfortunately, recruiters do filter, and GitHub is sometimes used as a filtering mechanism. Sure. So good idea.
It's funny. Like whenever I hear like recruiter, I immediately think like, okay, that this, like whenever I get contacted by recruiters all the time, as is anybody that in tech does, because tech is just so hot right now. But it's always very telling when a recruiter is knowledgeable about things versus not. But that's not the point of this discussion. I want to talk about kind of your path into open source, and like going through kind of, you did your chronological order of jobs. I see some interesting things, right? So the antithesis of open source, like IBM, right? And then you go straight from there to a company built on top of open source products, right? And then, like you want to talk about the culture shift?
Well, I mean, it was literally when IBM at the time, it was like Y2K, and IBM at the time was like all my, my parents, their friends were like, if you get a job at IBM, you've made it. you'll retire there. Like it was back in the day when we spent 20 years at a company and IBM even paid you to spend 20 years at a company. The golden parachute or whatever was created just after I started working, there. But that to be said, like it was the pinnacle of like, that's where you want to be. And so I was like, this is amazing. And then slowly but surely, Red Hat started really articulating this open source philosophy and the fact that you're paying $3 million for this software that has like a 6-month rev cycle. And like you get updates for bugs that you reported in January, you won't get them till October. And just this old school style of software development. Now the company has evolved since then. So obviously things are different now, but back then Red Hat started to really, it was kind of like the Apple PC type advertisement, right? Where Red Hat was the cool, new thinker, thoughtful, mindful, like intentional, open source, crowdsource, everyone's voice mattered. And IBM was like characterized as like the dinosaur. And so it wasn't hard, like I was at IBM for over 10 years. So when Red Hat started to become more popular, it was pre $1 billion. So it was like early in their growth, but it was very interesting to me. And I've always been impact driven in the choices that I make to go to companies. I want to make a big impact, and they sold me on the fact that you'd be changing the world. You're basically going to undo all enterprise software sales and we were going to change the world and make everyone move to this maintenance model, which kind of works. Yeah.
We're going to change the world so much that the machine that we're fighting is going to buy us.
Yeah.
So
the day that happened, I was like, how is that even possible?
I mean, it worked out well for everybody at Red Hat, right? Like, but it's very funny that, you see this, Microsoft has done the same thing, like, when Microsoft bought GitHub, right? Like, you see these huge companies buy like these companies that are built on a community or built on a series of tech that's like the kind of the opposite of what you would expect. And I can't speak for the Red Hat IBM thing. It looks like it's going well. But as being as being a consumer of GitHub and somebody who watches things, it definitely seems like GitHub is better for it.
I mean, I love the changes that are being made, but as with all of these things, as like community driven projects get acquired by, like, it's literally like the enemy that you've been trained is like the enemy. There's this contingent of people that just philosophically won't hang. And there were people that were the cornerstone of Red Hat to me, and they ended up leaving and going and now starting a different career in tech, but just basically called that chapter done. And I think that that's unfortunate because, I mean, that just is the nature of things. Not everybody's going to be able to accommodate. And when it's that, like, it would be a different story if GitHub bought Microsoft, right?
Yeah, well, full disclosure, I'm a Microsoft employee, so if GitHub bought Microsoft, I'd be a little concerned, just from a valuation standpoint. But I think
luckily that's not how it works. But we're the same way, right? If a community-driven project grew and then started,
I'm trying to think of an example of like a small startup-y kind of company buying like a really big company. I'm trying to think of an example of that, but I can't. Like
I would imagine. In the social media circles, that's probably true. Because like the Facebook, Instagram thing, right? Like from a valuation perspective, I don't know. Somewhere in there, I feel like.
Well, it depends. Like if you look at 5 years ago, I can't remember exactly when Instagram was purchased, but 5 years ago or whenever that was versus now, like it's very obvious which one is the more valuable brand, right?
Right.
But back then, my memory's not good enough to remember.
No,
I just remember,
but I do know that they were valued. Their valuation demonstrated that they were. So that was the future direction. And I see the same thing now with like apps like TikTok. Like somebody's gonna buy them, even though unless they decide to be like Snap and just do their own thing.
I mean,
But back to Red Hat, I wanted to share a quick story.
Yeah, of course. We're rambling. We're rambling about
I can't help myself.
Like other things. Let's talk about open source and Red Hat.
We can like easily go down that way. But at Red Hat, one of the most fascinating things I saw working there was that I guess it's the term, we ate our own dog food.
Sure.
Every single thing we did, including like the financials of the company, was run on open source software.
That's awesome.
Everything, which back then like there wasn't a whole lot of really strong open source comparative technology to things that you would have bought, like Oracle or even Microsoft Office,
Yep.
right? Like we were literally using like Star Office as like our corporate
Or like
standard.
like LibreOffice, I think was the other one too, right?
Yeah, like it was very interesting to me that we were so confirmed in the fact that open source, like we didn't want to be seen as someone who would say open source is the only way to go, and then we're going to go buy an enterprise piece of software from someone off the shelf. Obviously, that's changed. When I got there, that was the case. Even in the 5 years that I was there, that evolved. But it was just interesting to me. I thought that as that company started, it was like, these are the rules. And they even had this really cool document that you got as a new hire. First, you got a fedora. So that, I think that's awesome.
Do you still have it though?
I do.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yes.
The fact you're not wearing it right now is disappointing.
Yeah. But I don't work for them anymore, so I feel like it's,
No, it's
I have
fine.
to, like,
No, it's fine. I
mount
get it.
on the wall.
I get it.
Right next to my Alexa. But yeah, so you got a fedora, but they also have, and the fedora like logo is called Shadow Man, and the Shadow Man, it would have this, you'd get this doc that said, these are the things that the Shadow Man never says. And it's basically like things as a Red Hat person you should never say.
Sure.
And it was all these trite sayings like, I don't know, like things that salespeople say on a sales call, like for the win, or, all these, I loved it. I love the fact that we were trying to purposely say, if you catch yourself using one of these trite, meaningless statements, like that's not what we do here. And culture, I think culture was a big part of that organization. I felt like I was the only woman globally on the solutions architecture team. And it was like the golden years. I was like, oh my gosh, if I could do this all the time, I would. And then of course, grass got greener.
Sure.
Somewhere else.
Yeah.
But it was an amazing time at that time in the company because we weren't really big yet, but we were making really interesting changes.
Sure.
And I think that's what open source provides, right? That opportunity to like be divergent in your thinking, and then collect massive support for it.
The model's fascinating, right? You take completely open source things and you make money off of it, and you're very, very good at it. I think it just goes to show that, like, back to kind of open source equals community, right? They built a community around what they were trying to do, and like, let's be real, like Linux is cheap from an enterprise perspective, so like they were able to get some grow some fan base. So you kind of mentioned grass is greener things, right? Like obviously going from corporate world to kind of not corporate world back to corporate world, like
but not really. So I went to an organization at Vmware.
I guess Vmware isn't really super
which
corporate.
Ended up getting spun off into Pivotal. I don't know if you know Pivotal. Or
I
Cloud
do.
Foundry. Yeah, but it's very much like Red Hat. So VMware kind of was the IBM, and then they spun off this little company that was associated with VMware and EMC at the time.
Yep.
And it was like a startup, and we had our own valuation, and we were pre-IPO, and they finally did IPO. I couldn't wait that long. It was like 9 years later. But some people did very well because they hung in there. I mean, they said we'd IPO in 3 years, and at 3 years, I was like, okay, I'm good.
Pivotal has been very successful, right? Like they are one of those companies where when you think about just in that entire demo, like Pivotal's one of them. Like obviously, there's some other ones out there, but it's definitely very interesting. Like, so I'm guessing that you enjoyed the feeling of like the startup feel at that point, right?
Yeah,
because Red Hat
at
that point was probably like startup feel, and Pivotal / VMware Child, whatever it was called, was
the spinoff.
Yeah, the spinoff, right? That was also a startup feel, and then eventually you do go back to corporate world, right? You go to Amazon.
Yeah, but then I went to Alexa, and it was a startup when I started.
Sure,
I was employee 10.
It seems to me like you're finding like open sourcey type of like community led niches inside of these mega corporations.
That is, yes. I would say I'm pretty particular about the types of opportunities, and there are some companies that want to create these initiatives but don't have them yet, that have tried to, attract me to build it. But I'm not really interested in like ground up build a community from nothing. That is extremely hard work, and it's not really about like evangelism, which is what I'm good at. It's more about like logistics and infrastructure and, like the meat and bones of a community. I like to come in right after that's built and foster, right? Stoke the fire, not like build the fire.
Yeah, no, like building things is hard. Coming from somebody
it's
who
really hard.
I've never really.
And for some people are awesome at it, and that's their like special superpower.
I've never like built anything in my entire life. I was thinking about this a couple of months ago. Like if I actually ever finish anything, like I've built many, many things and then stopped the second the things are like kind of done, and I'm like, that's good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like the 80%. I think 80% rule. There's some husbands that are like this that are like into building, and they'll build things 80% and be like, I feel like it's good. And I know my friends are like, are you serious? Like you have to put a handle on that. You can't just leave it half stained because you lose interest if you're like innovative and you're constantly coming up with new ideas. Once you get almost to the end, you're kind of like, you can see the end. So you don't really need anyone else to see it, and you kind of move on to the next thing. My first thing that I built, and I did make it open source, and then people started using it. That might be an interesting story to tell, but was my Alexa skills. Yep. So working on Alexa, I built over 100 skills for Alexa in the first year of its life. I was in there was like 1,000 skills on the platform, and I had like, I don't know, 110 of them were mine. Which I had 10% of all skills on the platform at one point because I got a shirt that said like 10% of Alexa.
Yeah, that's a flex right there.
Yeah,
that is
right.
The
like
ultimate
it's like
flex.
I mean, it only lasted like a minute in the whole scheme of things, but it was really funny because I was like, oh my gosh, if I build 2 more skills, I'll have 10% of all the skills.
That's awesome.
So that's pretty funny.
I wanted to kind of
talk.
I
did build it.
Yeah, I want to kind of talk a little bit about your path into open source. Like we talked about kind of your career progression. So do you remember the first time you ever consumed anything open source? Like it doesn't have to be as a part of your job, or it could have been something you came across. I'm always curious to know like when people are like, oh, this thing is like free and I can just like look at it.
I mean, I would definitely say it was the day I started at Red Hat.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like from zero to Firehose, everything you do is open source. But as a developer, the first time I really used open source to learn a thing and then build a thing was Alexa.
Yeah.
Because I never, like to what you had said, I never actually finished anything up until I never published it. It was never anywhere where I could make money on it. Like it was never like deployed. And so GitHub was using GitHub to build Alexa skills was the first time I had done that. And I was part of the team that helped build the Lighthouse examples because I was just super passionate about if I'm going to teach someone to learn, they're not going to learn from a book, and we don't have time to write a book. Like we need this puppy to launch in like 3 weeks or 4 months or whatever it ended up being. And the only way I felt people could do that is if you gave them like 7 to 10 awesome examples that they could then fork, customize, push together, mold to create their own. And that became my platform for like a year and a half. I went around the country, around the world, talking about, here's your 7, baseline functions for Alexa, go build your own stuff. And people ended up building almost exact replicas of those, which frustrated me. Part of the open source philosophy, right, is like, I shouldn't care how people use it. But I have skills on Alexa that are being outranked by people who literally copied line for line my GitHub repo.
I mean, that's a marketing win.
And I can't care.
I see that as a marketing win. Like you didn't market your stuff good enough. That's how I see it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it basically just shows me like you could have done that if you want. If I got to 100% instead of 80%. Yeah. Easily. But I'm not. I mean, it's not really a moment of like I'm not disgruntled about it. It's actually quite flattering.
Yeah.
But it does go to show that when you're in open source, it's a constant check to your ego, and I think it's a good check. Like I don't really want to claim ownership, and it's not really mine, right? Like I learned from so many people in building the skills that I have, and then I made mine open source so people could build on the shoulders, right, of people who've gone before them. Instead of starting from scratch with the baseline, they could start with mine, which are kind of evolutions of that baseline. And that's, in my mind, one of the best features of having an open source community where people can continually build on top of each other. It's one of the reasons where, I have an open source philosophy at HackerU around our content development. And I really want, people that are teaching the curriculum, people that are taking it to have the ability to go in and see the content and add feature requests and do pull requests. And, and of course my company's like, wait, who's going to manage all of that? And I was like, don't worry about it. We'll be fine. I'm like, it manages itself. I literally said that in my head.
Ugh.
I'll figure this out. But being able to let the people that are consuming it and using it, like the instructors, have the power to provide immediate feedback and better yet, actually change a thing. I can't tell you how many times I've done something and been like, I could fix that for you right now if you just let me. And if it's not in GitHub, it's, or something similar like Bitbucket or whatever, it's very difficult to do that. And why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you let people that are passionate about what you do it for free? And it's a pull request anyway, but there's some organizations that are dead set against it.
Oh, sure. Just as a comment, right? So that statement that you made, right? It fixes itself. That's probably in the book, the Red Hat book of things you're not supposed to say.
No, exactly.
So, I think that throughout, it seems to me that you've had like this affliction, not affliction. That's a terrible way to say it. Oh, we're on the move. That's awesome.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. So one of the things that you've kind of been drawn to. No.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Carry on.
Multitasking is really important.
It is. It's very open source philosophy like.
Yeah, exactly. If people can't deal with it, they can leave.
Yes.
But don't leave.
Sorry.
Don't leave. So, through your career, I've definitely, as you're talking, you get very passionate about learning new things and giving the information that you've given or the skills that you've learned to others, right? And I imagine that's probably led you to where you are at HackerU, right? Do you want to just talk a little bit about what their charter is and what they're for?
Yeah, absolutely. So HackerU started off, actually, it's an Israeli company that's now created a new branch in the United States, and they are very well known for their cybersecurity curriculum. It's like the best in Israel. It has created many, many amazing professionals that are currently here in the United States and all over the globe. And they wanted to then expand. Obviously, cybersecurity is one area, and it's very IT pro kind of focused. So they wanted to get into software engineering. So just recently, they hired me to build the programs around data science and analytics and full stack development. And what I really like about HackerU is as all of us know, the university system is kind of being checked right now, right? Like, what are we going to do in a scenario where people are not going to be going in and doing like lecture hall learning, and they're paying for that experience? So the business model is literally shifting as we speak. And so HackerU is coming somewhat to the rescue to say, hey, big universities, those are the only people we partner with, big university like University of Miami, here is what we can do. We will build for you a program using industry experts. So that's one distinction. We are not driven by academia or research grants, right? We are actually going to the industry and hiring professionals to not only build the content, but deliver the content. And then we're making it extremely cheap so that anyone, we want to democratize access to university education, lower the price to a point where someone who maybe would not have ever thought they could go to a university now has the opportunity to do that. So it's very similar to like a boot camp type experience, right? We all know those coding camps out there. But HackerU is a little bit different because these are going to be, part of a university brand, and you get a university experience and a university instructor or professor. So I really like the idea of, wow, somebody who is right now on a path. I was this person. I was in high school, and my economics professor was like, you'll never graduate from high school. I'm never going to pass you in this class for whatever reason.
Cool.
It sucks for me.
Thanks, guy.
And of course, I basically dropped out of high school and went to college, and they took me. So it was fine. It all worked out.
Yeah.
But how many people get that told to them and they don't have it in them to go, you know what? I don't actually care what you say. I'm going to go take my SATs, do really well, and go to college without you. Most people just think that door is now closed, and they go become a cashier, or not that there's anything wrong with it, but they take whatever job they can get at that point, thinking that the opportunity is lost. So my hope is going into these different areas like Detroit and into areas like Miami and be able to show, high schoolers and community college people, like, there's an option for you, and you can get a university branded education that will now open the door to an entry level position where you can now make $80,000 to $120,000 a year.
Yeah.
Like, that's life changing.
Oh, yes.
And every time I hear of like a single mom, who's in community college, who never thinks they're going to make more than $40,000 a year, goes through this program and gets her first job at 80, doubles their income in 10 months.
Yeah.
I get goosebumps, thinking about it. Like, that's why, I mean, I loved NPR. I love working, like, that was like the pinnacle of my career. But hearing this mission, I was like, oh no, we're doing this.
Yeah. So unravel kind of a little bit how it works a little bit. So you mentioned that you bring in content developers and people to deliver the content, right? So
Yeah.
is the goal for it to be an available asset for non-university students, or is it very much for university students?
Well, I guess the idea is that the concept of a university student changes.
Changes,
So
yes.
you do have to go in and you have to be part of the program. We have cohorts, but you're now no longer in this, like if you're and you have 110 seats, right, for a semester, or 300 seats, or whatever it is, it's a finite number. We as an organization can scale to meet demand.
Yeah.
So I hire as many instructors as I need to create as many cohorts as we need.
Sure.
And because of the price point, people that are different than the typical person that would, get the nice letter in the mail. Maybe you got one that was like, congratulations, you got into
Sure, yeah.
That was a scarce thing. Like across the country, there's only like 30 or 40 universities and they only had a couple hundred spots. And there's a million people that would like to take that education.
Yeah.
So that's, I think the difference is that you could be a university student and not have that traditional entry point that we've seen for decades. We want to really flip the switch on technical education in that way.
No, that's absolutely amazing. The first thing that I think of as well is that, like, the first thing is it's introducing a new avenue for people, that, alternative forms of education, right? One of the things that I see that's maybe a little bit unclear. So with already existing university professors, like say for instance you're a computer science professor at the University of Miami, right? So are you partnering with this program at all, or are you simply, this just lives off here, you teach your students and then they teach other students?
That's right. So and it's because the goal of the programs would be different. If there's a computer science program, chances are it's going to be very academic. It's going to be very lecture driven. There'll be some trite hello world examples and maybe some canned, filled out examples, but it's not driven to make you a builder.
Yeah.
Right. So like for my full stack course, our objective is not learn these things. Like our objective is, can you build code and survive a coding interview? And that's not been the objective of university education. Like there's a career services place where you would go and maybe try and look on a job board.
Yeah.
But this is literally geared towards, and I do this in a way of, I have a really extensive, network on LinkedIn, and I reach out to people and I'm like, hey, if you have an open job for a data scientist, what business problem are you trying to solve? And they'll tell me, they'll be like, oh, well, we need, somebody who's going to be able to do time series forecasting for this type of business problem. And so now that's a project that we will build into our curriculum. Because if we tightly align the problems our businesses have with the projects the students do, and they sit in a room together, right, that conversation becomes easy, especially for people, I find, people of color, people in marginalized communities. They really struggle with confidence, even after taking a program. Like they struggle with like, can I make it? Like, am I,
Sure.
I was just 10 months ago, not thinking I'd ever do this.
Yeah.
How do I sit in a conversation and act like, yeah, I got this, right? Like it's hard for them. But if we align those projects so that the conversation immediately starts off on the same foot, like I already know how to solve the problem that you're asking me to solve, I feel like we enable them to be more successful. But even on top of that, we're encouraging them, to build projects they're passionate about. So one of our we call it a North Star at the company, is impact. And so how do we align the work that they do as an engineer? This is where open source comes in. How do I make sure that the projects that I'm building in the course first aligns with maybe some nonprofit or some small business in the area? And then I don't want to necessarily commit to that business. I'm going to solve your problem. But I want to know what your problems are. I'll build them within, as a student, I will build them out, and then I'll stick them on GitHub, and that company or all companies can go and use that code. And it creates this like reciprocity cycle of the student knowing the problem of the community, building a solution for it, open sourcing it, and then who knows, a nonprofit that uses that code or looks at it and gets inspiration, they might come back to that student and go, hey, you want to come work here or have an internship, or, it just creates relationships. So I think it's really interesting.
That's awesome. I think one of the things that really resonated with me as somebody that went through a typical like, hey, this is a college program to like have you be an IT professional or a developer. Like to your point, like tons of hello worlds, or they weren't hello worlds, but it's like, hey, write a big O notation thing, right? I'm like, cool, alrighty. Like, am I ever going to use this? And the first thing you find out when you get into a career in technology is like, oh, like the concepts make sense, but like you very much like, and I've been I am probably the opposite end where you don't need like a tech degree to be in tech. Like you just need very good problem solving skills. Right. And it sounds to me like you're sitting in the middle of that, right? Where else you need the concepts to like be able to build algorithms and things like that, but you also just need like skills to be able to see something and like, how do I walk through, what steps do I need to complete this? And that's awesome. Like looking back, that's the one thing that I regret about college is like I really never built anything that like could stand up, right? You're building a lot because, you know, college, and I don't want to beat down the university.
Right, like it is what it is.
It is what it is.
We've got a bunch of people, our entire workforce is based on this philosophy.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like you can only have so many TAs grading like, you know, 600 lines of code or whatever it is, right? That's awesome. So
and we're literally in this like perspective of how do we scale the unscalable, right? Because the tendency of a university program would be to do the things like, how do I create a project that I can easily grade or even automatically grade? And we had to resist the temptation to go that route and say, no, we actually need to either make smaller cohorts or hire more TAs, but we need, like, that's where the value is, like having someone do a peer review with you, right? Go through your code, tell you what you've done wrong, tell you, like we had this checklist that said, make sure when you post your project in GitHub, you have a README. And technically I could write a piece of software that checks to see if they have a README. Yep. But the README isn't actually the goal.
The content is,
What would be in there? How the content is vision, how you explain your code to someone, how do you make it accessible to more than just like the demographic maybe you represent or the one that you're building for? How do you make sure that all of that is in the README? And really only an engineer who's done it before and maybe has done it for a long time can really give you that feedback. So I think part of ed tech and part of changing the way we've always done things is looking at new ways of learning and how do we use, like most universities are using GitHub, but are they using it in like an innovative way? Like now they're using it more like a file system, right? Go put your project in there. We want to teach people like, how do you build software that can then be scaled beyond your usage? And there's more to it than just sticking your files in a file system.
Most definitely. That's brilliant. I have tons of questions, right? And I think we could probably keep talking. I want to make sure that there's a couple of things that we talk about, like how easy is it to get enrolled?
How easy is it to do what?
How easy it is to get enrolled?
Oh, in like a course?
Yeah.
It's optional. Oh, that's actually a great question. So one of the differentiators we've done with our programs is we created a 30-hour intro class. And so anyone can join. There are 0 prereqs. Our goal is to take someone literally who maybe dropped out of high school. We're hoping for like pre-cal, right? Like algebra would be good, especially in our data science courses. But I am one of those people that also believes heavily in aptitude. Like if you know how to learn, I feel like you can learn anything. It just, might be harder for some than others, but I do have a strong belief that you don't need prereqs. You just need the desire and aptitude to learn. So to enroll, especially in the intro program, all you do, like you'll get, you go to the website, you click enroll, and the admissions counselor will call you. And we don't want just anyone, right, just taking it for fun. You do have to pay for it. It's not much. It's like $500 or something for the intro course. Super comparable to like something you'd get on, Pluralsight or Coursera. And in that 30-hour course, it's basically the best and the brightest, right? It's literally the hook to what are you going to do and what are you going to be capable of by the end of the 10-month program. But we also want it to be meaningful. We want you to walk out of it and actually be like, you know what, I could probably get an entry-level job doing a piece of this role, or I could go on Upwork and start doing some freelance projects with this intro class. Like we want to show people the opportunity, and also we're big believers in the community, which is why, I felt like this conversation would be so fun because we're building this cohort, and this cohort is going to it's a life-changing thing. Sometimes even though I think the whole program's like $18,000, which is half of what most boot camps are that are this length, and certainly associated with the university. So it's relatively cheap. But for someone where it's like, they're making 18,000 a year or making 20,000 a year, and those are the types of people we want to really look at. This is a huge investment for them.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot that goes into that, a lot more than just like, hey, you're going to learn to code. They're going through like imposter syndrome. They're going through like life-changing, so our instructors, in addition to being industry experts, they kind of have to be life coaches, right? We've created, because we're data people, metrics that kind of can track how well someone is doing, like how many times they had to take a quiz.
Sure.
And then we don't just send them an email and be like, hey, you better do that 2 more times or go read this chapter, right? We hop on the phone with them or we get on a Zoom call and we're like, what can we do? Let's work through something together. Let's go through your application. Let's find something you're passionate about. And that's what I love about our projects. It's like, we're going to tell you to build a game, but we're going to say, like, what is it that you love? Do you like yoga? Are you into weather? Are you into whatever it is? And then let's build a project that you'll be proud to do and proud to show your family, proud to show your friends, and then ultimately proud to show an employer. And those are not the liberties that you get in the traditional education, boot camp program. Like, there's not much wiggle room. Again, this is scaling the unscalable, because now we have to figure out, how do we scale that? But I think it's worth it, because you'll end up with people that can succeed, because the whole time, just like you said, it's problem solving. Yep. It's less about, here is the theory behind the model, like in our case, in our data science, like we're going to go through 7 different models that they're going to build from scratch, but we never actually call out the model.
Yep.
I mean, we do in the class, but in the syllabus,
sure,
it's the problem that we're solving. And then we do it in the context of the model that right. They're like, oh, this happens to be a different type of model that maybe solves for like a time series model versus a singular classifier. All of these, it doesn't make sense to say that to someone who's never been, and it's actually intimidating. And most books, they go right to like the most technical term possible.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, if you go read Medium articles, it's almost like people don't want you to want to learn, right? Like, it's like, no, we are way too complicated over here. And so our hope, especially with data analytics and data science, is to demystify that and realize, like, it's really just like anything else. Mm-hmm. Everything's hard if you don't know what it is. So let's give you a path to get there and align you with the problems that your businesses have. But yeah, I think that's a big part
that's
of
great.
What makes it different.
I kind of equate it to, when we're children and we're learning math, right? Like, showing you an equation is not helpful to like a 7-year-old. But, if this car is going 45 miles an hour, how far will it drive in 2 hours, right?
Right,
like,
exactly. Or put ice cream in there or anything.
Yeah, like if I have 5 apples and I eat 4 apples, I'm going to have a tummy ache. But one thing as well that I have a question about is, so obviously the goal is to bring in new developers, right? So, but what about existing developers? So, like folks that, say for instance, I'm a junior developer.
Kind of people?
Say that again?
Like career change people?
Yeah, either career change or people that they're already in tech, right? But they just feel like maybe they've done a lot of job interviews and they keep getting turned down. It's because they found out over the course of maybe a year or two that like they're not strong in this particular area of tech. Like maybe they're a data person and they're doing hardcore software dev, or they've been stuck doing systems admin work when they really want to be a DevOps person. Like I'm guessing those type of people can come in as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, in my mind, we see basically 3 types of students. One is a career changer, someone who is coming from sales or coming from business development, and they have always wanted to get into technology but never felt like, it was affordable, because there is a myth in data science and data analytics that you have to have like a master's degree and you have to go all the way and have multiple PhDs. And now, as AI and machine learning has become commoditized and they are now in production in normal companies, which before was just R&D. So it made sense because it was academic in nature. But now AI is like running in production at NPR. So if that's the case, we're less really worried about like how many years you spent in school and more worried about, can you do this thing, which is why boot camps are so successful. Yeah. So one is like a total shift of a career into a space you don't know. Another, as we mentioned, is one that you have no experience whatsoever in tech at all. and maybe never got to a traditional university level education. But the third one is, and really it's infinite, but the third bucket we've kind of thought about from a persona perspective as we're developing the curriculum is that person that wants to just shift domains, right? Where they've got some core understanding or knowledge in software engineering and, baseline understanding of like statistics and math, but they want to now shift and get deep expertise in analytics or business intelligence or what's the other term we use? Anyway, there's a bunch of different roles that all kind of do the same thing.
Sure.
And so our job is to really show people what's the basics that you need to know to be qualified in this role. Now, our output, though, we are looking for people. Our deliverable is to get someone an entry-level job in the field of either data science, data analytics, or full-stack web development. So mid-career people, it might be less applicable,
Sure.
right? Because you might not want an entry level. But there are also people that are in careers, in mid-career, that are like, I hate my job.
Yep.
And so why wouldn't you start over? Every company I've been in, I've started over. I was at the top of my game at a company, and then I go to the new company, and I'm now the new person. I have no team, and then I have to build myself up, become a people manager. Like I climb the ladder all over again. And I actually don't mind it because I like learning and I like being an IC or independent contributor before I become a manager.
Sure.
So I think it's fine, and we welcome those students, but it's less likely that someone would be willing to take an entry-level job in an industry because we all feel like we're sometimes better than that.
So that's how people come to the as consumers of the program, right? So you kind of talked about scaling the unscalable, right? Like, so how do you forecast how many content developers do I need, or how many lecturers or content deliverer is not a word. People who deliver content, like how do you scale
Professors.
that?
Yes. So it's a 400-hour course, including that 30-hour intro course. So 370 hours. And I literally, put on my PM hat and wrote out a roadmap. And then I looked at basically my delivery time, right? Because everything's a function of either the time, the number of people you have, the tech that you're using. And so I went in and looked at, all right, I want to get this out by next February, which is our current launch date for full stack. So I want to get it out by February, make sure the world gets it in February. So now I worked backwards from that, just like any normal project manager would do. And then I realized I needed, 5 people to be able to do that job well. And so I hired 5 people. But the nice thing about, our mission as a company is that we recognize we're going to scale the unscalable and we're going to need more people. Yeah. And so we are constantly evolving that number. So even just today, I realized, for analytics and data science, which are in the same course, we want at the end, you will take, you're going to get all of this baseline functionality, which if you look at like a Venn diagram of data science and analytics, they're actually overlapped quite a bit in the foundation of like data just management and data understanding and data engineering. And then they split off where it comes to like research and models and forecasting versus, visualization and story communication and, business value. So what we tried to do is like separate, basically give you the baseline and then allow you to break out into electives, right? That would allow you to specialize for a specific role within the industry.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So say for instance, I've public speak. Let's just take me for example. I'm a public speaker. I've been a developer off and on my entire career, and I'm very captivated by the story you're telling. And it's like I've been teaching for a long time, whether it's teaching younger developers in my job or giving presentations, or maybe I author on Pluralsight. How do I get a job?
Yeah. So literally right now, you can go over to HackerU and just apply. So because we're building our programs right now, I always encourage people just send me, like go on LinkedIn and be like, hey, Noelle, I heard you on Twitch. Here's my, information. And I just add it to my list of potential instructors. The beautiful part about this right now is that due to the unfortunate nature of our world and that we are remote, you can be a adjunct professor at any of our, approved universities, no matter where you are in the country right now, which is amazing, question. Right? Yeah. So you don't have to be like, if you're going to be a Miami instructor, you don't have to be in Miami. And who knows how long that'll last, right? I'm presuming at least for the next year, 2 years, vaccine future, who knows? but it also, I think it's part of how the model is changing.
Exactly.
Because I care less about the physical location, and I hope more companies think this way, but I care less about the physical location than I do about the industry expertise combined with the ability to inspire and motivate these students, because these students are coming, like this is their last hope in some cases, right? Like they're like, if I don't pass this, I'm in trouble. Like I just spent, this money, this needs to be my future. And if they start to fall behind, we need instructors that aren't, I don't know if you had these instructors, but my professors in university didn't necessarily care about me as an individual. And I don't think it was a race or gender thing. Like, I just think that wasn't why they were there. Like, they came in and they're like, look, I don't get my research funding unless I spend 3 hours with you people. So here I am. Here's my talk. Read the book. Make sure you don't miss a deadline.
Or to be even more cynical than that, I'm trying to get tenure, and you're a face until I get tenure.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, it's not student focused or customer obsessed, as some of us would say, right? So this is our opportunity for us to look at the thought leaders. And I mean, how many thought leaders always thought, man, it'd be cool to teach at a university, but would never have done that just because of the scenario that it requires. And most of the time you have to have a master's degree or a PhD to do that. And so this is really like flipping the script, on typical university education. And in my mind, it brings who the student needs even more closer to them, right? The person who's in the job, doing the work. And that this community of instructors is like their family, like carrying them through. And, my goal, as I look at my team that I just created, I look at our Zoom and it's like this beautiful symphony of colors and shapes and sizes and gender and
that's awesome.
All sorts of things. Like, I love it, but I had the luxury of building that team like from scratch. So it was easier to do. It's 12 people. It's not hard. But I want the exact same thing for my instructors, right? I want anybody who's sitting in a seat in my class to look up at some point in the course and go, that's me.
Yeah.
And I never had that as a kid. I always wanted to be in tech. I never saw a Hispanic woman up there, ever.
Yeah.
Until I was in my 30s. So yeah, I really want us to, and even if they don't exist, like one of the things, if there's anyone like listening that's like, oh man, I wish I could do that, but I am so not, us, people that get on and do podcasts and like teach. But if there's a part of you that likes this story and wants to contribute to the lives of these engineers, as long as you are doing the work and you're passionate about helping them, like that qualifies you. We're not looking for people that are professional trainers. We're actually definitely not looking for professional trainers. We're looking for people like you and I that are professional, engineers or professional data scientists that happen to like teaching too.
Oh yeah, like, there's a lot of things that you resonate with. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, but I was fortunate enough to have a lot of people that look like me in my classes and my teachers and things like that. But I always questioned like why this was always such a challenge, right? And especially now with the current, environment that we're in, I still question, like even in tech, it's like, why do we care about anything other than, I don't even care if they're really, really good at being like a developer. Like, give me some good people skills, give me empathy, give me problem solving skills, and that's it. Like, I don't need anything else.
Yep.
I had a boss one time tell me, I can teach you literally anything you want to learn, but I can't teach you how to be a good person. And not saying that I'm a good person all the time, but like that really resonated with me. It's like, if I just go about things in a positive way, I can figure out how to do anything. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about what you're doing in HackerU is you're also you're not just opening up an avenue for folks trying to get into tech, but you're also giving an avenue for folks who all kind of want to get out of tech. Right? Like, take me for example again, because I'm a narcissist. So, like maybe I don't want to be a developer anymore. I'm not a developer right now, but if I was a developer, maybe I want to get into teaching. And I don't have a master's, so academia isn't an option. I don't have the patience to be like a Pluralsight trainer because I just don't have the patience for that. But I definitely can lecture in front of a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever. I can have office hours. I can do all of these things because I love the interaction of I love the fulfillment of giving back. Like that's something that I figured out.
And the light bulb effect, right? Like when you watch your student go, Oh.
And it's so synonymous too with open source. Like, to get back, circle back all the way to this open source thing, is that like whenever I talk to people about open source, the first thing they say is like, open source is community. And if you build a community, you're always going to be successful. Unless you build a community that's not that great, and then you're not going to be successful, right? But I think, from a perspective of tech, if you build a community around something that you're trying to accomplish, and you're doing it the right way, you're going to be successful. And I think what you're doing at HackerU, like, it ties a lot to just the open source movement. For sure, honestly, you're trying to open source education, like, which is a terrifying comment. But it's very, like, that's how I see it. It's awesome.
But it really is just shifting the business model to be more about transformation of, like, because that's the only way we're going to. I always say, like, I want to generate or create a new generation of engineers.
Yep.
Engineers that are just like all the things you just said, optimistic and empathetic, and seek diverse thought, not just in physical ways like ethnicity and gender, but the value of an introverted opinion and an extroverted opinion, and how do we think about people with special needs, or most importantly, people with like physical disability. I think it's just fascinating to me. I uncovered that 1 in 5 people in the United States have physical disabilities, and I've never worked with one. How is that possible? How is it possible that none of my engineers have ever had a physical disability? It's not possible. So it makes me wonder at the gate, which is why I decided to move to the front of the funnel. How do we make sure that this is accessible to everyone, that anyone can become a software engineer? Like you said, if you're passionate, and I can teach you even programming, but I can teach you problem solving. I can teach you how to Google, which is what we all do, and I can teach you how to search GitHub and get a good example and a baseline to work from. But the fact that there are an entire population of people that aren't even in our community, aren't even available. I had someone reach out to me the other day and was like, "Oh, you're the first person of color I've seen in the voice tech community, in the Alexa community." And I first was like, "Oh, thanks." And then I was like, "That is terrible.
Yes. That
is terrible. Yes. How is that possible that I am like the only one?" And every time I see like 44 leaders in tech, and it's not, it's not a symphony of color, size, shape, personality. Oh, for sure. Right? And there's no reason for that. But unless, I feel like that's why I'm where I'm at now, is that I can actually impact filling that funnel. And if we create the community, right? If we create something that lasts outside of the individual job, that keeps people feeling like they're contributing, which is why open source is so powerful, I can maintain my friends, if you will, or my circle, my network in a place like GitHub. And as I move from company to company, I don't let that single job get me down or allow me to dismiss an opportunity in the technical industry, which is what happens today. People get into a bad job, get a bad manager, and then they leave the industry. Like, they're like, especially I found my, colleagues that are female and Hispanic, like, our culture is very intolerant of bad behavior. So if people have bad behavior, we kind of like are like, I don't need to do this. I'll go do something else. I'll become a social worker, or I'll go become a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer. I don't need to be in tech. But that's a loss for our industry. And we've just seen that over the last 20 years. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I change the DNA of the engineers that are, and I'm not like, of course there's going to be, I want all colors. Like, white men are still going to be in those classes.
Well, I hate to say it to you, but we kind of run the world for the foreseeable future, unfortunately.
Yes. Someone told me once, an older woman, she was in her 70s, and she looked at me and she said, an entire generation of people in the Fortune 500 have to leave. Yeah. And she said, die, but I don't like saying it. Sure. Like, they have to leave the industry in order for this to get better. And I, of course, was like, no, I'm not waiting. Like, I will be at the end of my career by then. And then it's just going to start. So I was like, no, we can start changing the DNA of our engineers right now. And my hope is that companies will see value in those new perspectives and start promoting those people into middle management. Because really, middle management has been my biggest challenge. Not so much executive leadership, like Satya, awesome. Jeff Bezos even has his own very awesome perspectives on leadership and how to run a company. But then, 3 layers in, things start to go back to like 1984, 1998. And so I really think that as a community, I don't want to say younger, but like as a generation that thinks differently about software engineering, which is the GitHub generation, if you will. I feel like we could change the DNA of these companies if there's more of us. And so that's why I'm doing.
Well, is it selfish to say that you don't want to wait for the next generation to get the benefits? Is it selfish to say that?
Oh no! I mean, that's
exactly
when
right.
that woman said that. That's exactly what I felt.
I might be selfish, but I want to enjoy things. Like,
yeah,
my kids, they're gonna have their own set of things to deal with and things to enjoy. Yeah. Like, maybe I want to enjoy things.
Yeah.
I think
that's exactly how I felt. I'm like, no, I'm not waiting 20 years for this.
Yeah. Like,
oh no.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I never left tech. I mean, I've had really bad experiences, like unnecessarily difficult experiences in my career. But if I leave, then what? Then that woman would never have found anyone to represent like who she looks like. And she's young, she just got out of college. She's looking for her first job. I talked to a community. It was actually like Girls Who Code kind of event, and they were teenagers. It was like 4 years ago. And I spoke to a teenage group of women, girls, 17, 18 years old. And I gave them my spiel about like women in tech, and this is amazing. And it's hard, but it's worth it. And you represent, this demographic of people that can change the perspective and help diversify the way we do things and all the good things. And then I, of course, showed them how to build, I think I showed them how to build a web application on S3 or some kind of cloud service. And it was very interesting to me that like just a month ago, one of those girls who's now 23 years old just got her first job at Microsoft and was telling me like the reason that I stayed was because I saw you. And of course she's a person of color. And she's like, I saw you and you said something. And so I always encourage people, even if they're not a good speaker, like no one starts off good, first of all. But even if you're not a good speaker, there's someone like looking for you, looking to say, is someone out there like me, someone who's introverted, someone who isn't really, who maybe is a little socially awkward or who maybe isn't, classically trained as a developer. Is there someone that is representative of the kind of journey I'm going to have? And I really think that that's part of what makes, this successful is we all have to do our part to advocate, to be a representation for people that are, whether they're our age, whether they're older than us, or even, of course, if they're younger than us. But I just feel like being an example of whatever it is that you're doing is a critical part of the community. Yeah, I agree. My lens is a little colored. Yeah.
I feel the importance of every job to mirror the look of who we are as a nation, right? Like, if I don't know what the numbers are these days, but like the numbers in people in tech, percentage-wise, aren't equivalent to what they are in demographics. Like, it's
That's
predominantly
and by far.
Yeah,
right?
it's predominantly white male when like 100% of U.S. is in white male, right? Like that'd be a really crummy country.
Yeah, and that our numbers are dismal, right? Like it's good. Like in the last 5 years, we've started collecting better data, which is amazing, and we've started publicly reporting that data in some companies, which is also fantastic. But the fact that in 5 years those numbers have not gotten better, and in some cases they've actually gotten worse. I mean, Latina executives, 1% of the 1%. How's that possible? That's not possible. So I look at that and I'm like, how do we fix that problem? And that problem, of course, you can't come out of college and become an executive unless you're building a startup, but how do we change like the DNA of the Fortune 500? I just saw an article yesterday that said we have 4 CEOs in the Fortune 500 that are people of color. None of them are female. So I feel like there's probably an executive that happens to be female and an African American that probably could manage be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but there's something about the way we are running things that doesn't make that possible. But I am hopeful and optimistic. So I feel like communities like GitHub, like even Twitch, like we build momentum this way, and we can change, at least I've found, I can change the way companies think about things because I have a conversation that's not just my voice. So many times I felt like I'm alone. I'm the only one who thinks this. And that's one of the, I mean, it's very unfortunate and sad about the kind of racial concerns we have that are overt in our country right now. But it helps everybody call things out easier than 5 months ago, right? Like 5 months ago, we had the same problems, but today I hear people in board meetings saying like, that's not okay what you just did. You know, like, and I love it. I feel like, awesome, let's call all the bad behavior out. Let's do something about it. I still don't see as much action being taken when bad things happen, but at least we're starting to call it out. But I do think community is like, I'll tell you one really quick story about what happened. It's kind of a sad story, but I was in a newly minted executive, and I went in and was so excited. I was a new leader. I am the kind of leader that I feel like the company wanted, that, you know, I'm diverse. I have a diverse opinion. I think about things very differently. And I went then to join like Slack channels, right? Where all of the people of color and all of the different, like the Latinx community were all, and I joined these Slack channels. And you know what happened? They actually kicked me out. And they said to me something that I believe I have heard before, which is, we actually don't want leadership in here. This is for us, our safe environment to complain and vent. And I get it, except I was the different leader. I was the leader that would listen to them and have a space in an executive board meeting to make a change. And literally they were like, you can't sit at our table anymore. Yeah. And now I'm the only person of color in my executive team. So now I can't sit at their table either. So I'm literally alone. But that's where communities like, you know, like GitHub and places like that, where I can go back regardless of the company I'm in. And now this weird situation, I have people and I have my people that like think like me. And, you know, we've been coding together for years. We've gone through these journeys. So I feel like that's one of the reasons why community can be so critical. That's outside of your current role. Because sometimes these things happen and you feel like, wait, if you guys won't be my friend and you guys won't be my friend, this is not going to be very fun for me. And I've relied heavily on those community networks. You know, LinkedIn has become my family. I have cried many tears on a LinkedIn Live, like telling my LinkedIn family all the drama that happens at work. But it's always been supportive. I've never had a troll come in and be like, you know, the problem is you. You know, like it's always been very sympathetic and positive and inspirational. You know, to me, like I've been inspired by sharing and hearing the feedback that people like would be like, oh my gosh, that happens to me in my company, or that just happened to me, or that happens to me every, 2 months or whatever. And the interesting thing about that feedback is everybody gave me that feedback. All types of people, white men, African Americans, Latinas, women, everybody was like, that happens to me. And I don't know if that's good or bad. Ultimately, it led me to believe that bad experiences happen to everyone. Sure. And the only protection against bad experiences is to have a network in your industry that you feel like likes, cares, and trusts you, right? And I feel like GitHub is one. I think Twitch is another. LinkedIn is another. Like, how do you cultivate a group of people that when things are tough, you feel like you could go to them and they'll make you feel better professionally?
Yeah. Well, we're all in this together, and that we're all in this together to fight the trolls, right? Like, we're all in this to fight the trolls.
That bad behavior happens to, I think that's the big, lesson. It happens to everyone. I mean, obviously there are some racial big challenges, but everyone gets treated badly. And sometimes everyone gets treated badly by a middle manager,
Sure.
Where you have that experience where you're like, wait, you're going to, like, I'm basically getting fired right now. Everyone goes through this at some point in their career, some challenge. And so knowing that you're not alone, the only way to really do that is to expand your network beyond your current role. And if you're new to the industry, like start building it now. I always say, find people you like and ask them for informationals on LinkedIn. Like, just be like, hey, I'd love to talk to you for 30 minutes. Yeah. And it's kind of like how we got together.
Yeah, exactly. I asked a question about Alexa and people were like, talk to Noelle. Like, okay, I'll talk to Noelle.
Yeah, and that's probably because she's like, she'll talk to you about it. She's so excited.
Yeah. So someone in the chat had a really good question. So Michael Crump asked, my daughter is 10 and I've been getting her into programming through Scratch and other things like Microsoft Maker. Like, for her to start getting started in tech, like, what is the advice that he can give her? Yeah,
so I will share with you what I did. When my son was 9 years old, we started building skills on Alexa. So it's true you could do this with Raspberry Pi, anything that provides immediate gratification, right? You write a line of code and a light turns on.
Sure.
You write a line of code and an LED displays, or in this case, you write a line of code and Alexa does what you say. We built an Alexa skill. The nice thing about Alexa skills is that you could build them using what's called blueprints, right? And it's low code or no code, which is really beneficial because it is still technology. It's still software engineering concepts, but it's not necessarily like you have to write 200 lines of JavaScript in order for something to work. And so blueprints are a great way to get started. But I find that combination of like a real world thing combined with the technology, like you're not just writing an app, you're building, like a way for them to voice control their lights in their room, or a way for them to build a quiz for themselves to do flashcards for their homework. Seeing a real world application is hard to do for a 10-year-old, but Alexa skills can do it, Raspberry Pi, microbits, all of those provide this like real tangible connection between the code they're writing and the real world that they're writing it for. And I found that works. So that skill, anyway, that was written, he's now 13 years old, and that skill is now making $60 a month through developer rewards on Alexa. So he's like stoked.
Oh, man.
He's been on the platform for
13 with $60 a month?
Yeah, so
I'd be in trouble.
Alexa, based on the usage of your skill, will pay you developer rewards.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really funny that he's making $60 in the UK, mind you. Like it's not even in a US based skill; it's a UK based skill.
Cool.
It's called Mythical Unicorn Trivia.
That is awesome.
Man, COVID has one benefit: people got way more interested in unicorns. So.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of things that they're better about some countries than the United States, but that's a whole different thing. We're gonna go on something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. So, Noelle, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Like, this has been an amazing conversation. Like I said earlier, really I could keep talking to you about, I'm trademarking the term open sourcing education because I think that's brilliant.
Yes.
I think one of the things that we want to call out is that HackerU, like, there's opportunities for you to join as a student as well as join as a contributor. So definitely take a look at that sort of stuff. And I want to finish our conversation with, I already led into a little bit. So I like to ask folks, like, when they think of open source, like, what's the one word or the one phrase that you think about?
Oh, the one word. I guess I would actually use accessibility.
Accessibility.
And I like it because it encourages me to really look at lots of different perspectives. So you can, for example, if you look at the Alexa repo, you can see how many people and how many different use cases people have used some of these baseline like lighthouse examples for. And so I love the fact that like open source gives you the ability to build something and then potentially see a totally different demographic, a totally different psychographic, like use your code in a way you never thought was possible or you never conceived of even going in that direction. And then that inspires me to go back and re-engineer, right? And rethink about how do I make sure that audience is, addressed. So accessibility is really big for me. I have a son with Down syndrome. I have a dad who is 72 but has cognitive disability due to a traumatic brain injury. So I'm constantly thinking, like, how do I make the world better for them? How do I give them access to the software that I use because I can type on my keyboard or go to my smartphone? How do I make the world available to them? And I can't easily do that if I don't go back and rethink the way I built my software. Our 2000 software, that's not going to cut it because we weren't, at least on the projects I was on, we weren't super careful about thinking about all the different use cases and being empathetic to all of these different constituents. Like even Alexa, we basically built it for the 1% of the 1%. Now we're thinking differently about that. And we're like, oh, what about people who have accents from New Jersey? And what about people who have accents from Mississippi?
Sure.
Right? But that wasn't if we had thought about that early on, we could have solved that problem before anyone ever noticed that it wasn't good at it. Now we're having to catch up, or now Alexa's having to catch up. So I think having community and open source fosters the ability for people to say, hey, what about me? This is how I think about what you're building. And I love that.
That's absolutely brilliant and a great way to end the conversation. So thank you again, Noelle. This was great. And one of the things to call out, so HackerU, again, you can be a contributor as well as you can join and start your career in different data practices as well as software development. So thank you so much Noelle, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Buddy, enjoy and hope you get some more coffee later. Bye-bye.